Bom dia, muito bem-vindos à última aula do curso Brasil e Palestina, fontes de identificação. Welcome to all of you to the last class of our course, and it's an immense pleasure, a great honor to receive here Selma Dabakh, who is a British Palestinian writer of fiction and a lawyer. She teaches creative writing at Goldsmiths University in London, and she's the COO of the International Center for Justice for Palestinians, the ICJP. She's also on the advisory board of the committee, of the British Palestinian Committee, and her doctoral research considered whitewashing and propaganda in the novels of Muriel Spark and Soraya Antonius. After Selma speaks, after her speech, then we receive, and it's an immense pleasure and an honor also to receive my colleague at the university, Safa Jubran. She's an associated professor at the University of São Paulo, where she teaches Arabic language and literature. She's an advisor at the PPG, our graduate program at university called Letras. She researches in the field of translation. She's also head of a research group called Tarjama, translation, registered at CNPq. She's a literary translator, received several prizes for that, and she's the Portuguese translator of Elias Khoury's novels, Baba Shams, Gate of the Sun, and My Name is Adam, the first volume, which is already out. So Safa, it's a great pleasure to receive you. And finally, it's an immense pleasure and honor to receive our special guest for this course, Elias Khoury. He's a renowned novelist who has dedicated his most recent works to the topic of Palestine, including Gate of the Sun, Children of the Ghetto. He has acted as the editor of different Arabic journals, arts festival director, professor at Columbia, New York. He's a public intellectual who plays a major role in the Arabic cultural scene and in the defense of liberty of expression. Professor Safa will have a lot more to say about Elias Khoury and her work in translating also his novels. So thank you to all of you, and thank you to all our students who have continued up to today with this course. So it's great to have you. Selma, please feel free to begin. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm really grateful to Professor Klemscher for this wonderful invitation, and to the University of São Paulo to invite me here to speak on this topic today. I've been asked to address the topic of, is there a current Palestinian narrative, which is a fairly daunting one, as surely there are as many Palestinian narratives as there are Palestinians. And it's also, furthermore, it's a little daunting to be speaking on this subject in the company of someone as estimable as Elias Khoury, whose work I have read and admired for many years. So what I'm going to be doing in the time allocated to me is not to pretend that I can cover off on this topic in a comprehensive way, but to present some findings from my own research and to suggest some ideas for discussion and future lines of inquiry. So if we could possibly have the first of my slides. Okay, so that's the organization I work for in London. If I could have the next slide, please. And these are just some images I put together, and then one following. Okay, so I started off, for those of you who've read my abstract, with this poem by Abu Ala al-Ma'ari, which, if I give you a chance to read it, it says, hold tight to what is most yourself, don't squander it, don't let your life be governed by what disturbs you. There are different interpretations as to what al-Ma'ari is referring to here, but to me it's a kind of relevant reminder that we should always be not just defining ourselves as individual people according to what we want, aspire to, and the values that we hold dear to ourselves, but not just to be responding to the pressures against us. So in the Palestinian context, to me, what I'm saying here is that we need to not just as resistance movements, we have not just to be defensive in terms of events on the ground, but also to develop a strategy, a long-term strategy with positions of desirable outcomes in sight. So if I could just have the next slide, please. I have quite a few slides. The first ones I will be spending a little bit more time on, and then I'll be going much more quickly. So to start off with here, we've got what is a narrative, basically, as a starting point. And there's a really good article that I refer all of you to on the issue of what is the need for political dimensions within a Palestinian narrative by Hazem Jamjoun. And he says, okay, so a national narrative is, who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going and why? Okay. And in terms of when it comes to Palestine, I see there has been, for the purposes of this talk, three main thrusts of narrative when it comes to Palestine: the political, the legal, and the literary and artistic. I'll be speaking mainly on the literary and artistic, but to consider first the political and legal, which are very broad topics within themselves. But they are easier, I would argue, to analyze and to identify than the literary is, because they normally take more of a declaratory form. These are statements. They are statements saying, this is where we are, this is what we should be. They normally come from prescribed organizations or channels, and there is normally a sort of a ranking in terms of a priority as to what should be listened to. So whereas the literary narrative, when it's developed, is far more nuanced, it's more private, it serves more as a confessional. It's not exterior projections, but interior responses. Its messaging, if it exists at all, is coded, individualized, and emotive. Now, the political and the international legal, when it comes to Palestine, are far from being aligned. And it's safe to say that historically, the political was often when there was a Palestinian Liberation Organization leadership, which you will have discussed in earlier classes on this excellent course. But when there was a PLO, you often had a rejection of the United Nations or the international legal line when it came to Palestine, because it was seen to be a compromise of the desired position. In recent years, to an extent, there's been a bit of a reversal. The legal is sometimes holding a stronger position of desired outcome than the Palestinian Authority stated requests. So that, but also the legal, the international legal is now being developed more notably in line through a dedicated series of special rapporteurs of the occupied Palestinian territories in a way that is more sensitive to Palestinian aspirations. And the civil society movement is increasingly being centered around the boycott and divestment and sanctions movement, which is gaining considerable global support, both, again, supporting the legal for political outcomes. So, in terms of what a Palestinian narrative is, one point that I need to make from the outset, given the nature of the Palestinian population being dispersed across many boundaries, is that it's essentially international, transnational, and no matter what emphasis is placed on the land of the former Mandate of Palestine, any identification of the Palestinian narrative has to take on a transboundary, anti-boundary, beyond boundaries, boundaryless approach. It is a distinguishing feature, and I would say that it's a power within it. Secondly, the question of who we are and where we came from is ostensibly easier question to answer to the ones about where we're going. There are approximately 10 million people globally who self-identify as being Palestinian, 2/3 of whom live in diaspora and forced exile, most of whom insist on native belonging to Palestine. There are multiple examples defining who Palestinians are and where they came from the UNRWA definition of a refugee to this one from the Palestinian National Covenant of 1968, where in its Article 4 it says, the Palestinian personality is an innate, persistent characteristic that does not disappear and is transferred from fathers to sons. The Zionist occupation and the dispersal of the Palestinian Arab people as a result of the disasters which came over it do not deprive it of its Palestinian personality and affiliation and do not nullify them. The assumption is that there's a sort of immutable quality to being Palestinian that does not change. This idea is increasingly being challenged by the wide range and diversity of voices of Palestinian writing in other languages. The heterogeneity and diversity of experience is one aspect that is clearly found in Palestinian literature. Of the three narratives, literature is the most clearly able to reflect and to expand on differences rather than to categorize essentials as to who are Palestinians. And there's one work by Maurice Ebelini which looks at diaspora literature from Palestinians in Iceland to Australia to the US and the UK. And he shows, as one reviewer said, that being Palestinian is about much more than being just being in Palestine. So the last part of the Jamjoon quote about where we are going and why, what Palestinians are seeking amounts to a decolonization practice that, in Nora Erekart's words, reorganizes the relevant relational terms mediating Israelis as settler sovereigns and Palestinians as natives marked for erasure. The solution sought has also been answered with assertions of the right of return and a peaceable future. So this is the end that we're looking for. Now, what form that takes is obviously it's the subject of huge debate, if it's two-state or one-state or multi-state or federal, and it's not the topic of this talk. But there are also statements within earlier pronouncements by Palestinian leadership about what we're after. And there's this talk about an atmosphere of tranquility and peace for the Holy Land. And then you've also got DFLP documents from the 70s, which talk about international solidarity in the struggle against the common enemy of imperialism, Zionism, and Nazism throughout the world, and for the progress, liberty, and peace of all peoples. So the two things from the original sort of Palestinian documents on the political struggle will refer to, which are no longer really referred to much anymore. One is armed Arab unity and the other is armed struggle, and these were central to the political argument. But there's now been a sort of movement away from that. And international law is increasingly being used as a bar, being fought for by Palestinian advocates. So, and as Professor Noor Masalha has commented on recently, Israel has never complied with any of the 200 or so UN regulations or resolutions on the situation in Palestine, Israel. So, and it's also known that Israeli government lobbies overtly and behind the scenes apply pressure to water down or dismantle UN commissions, such as the new Independent UN Commission of Inquiry, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN Human Rights Council, and the laws of universal jurisdiction. So the Palestinians campaign on the other side to strengthen these international legal bodies and to have their support. So the Palestinian narrative has international law as a backbone, and it has become a sort of test as to whether international law is being applied free of political influence, as to whether it is being applied with regards to the Palestinians rather than more politically expedient choices. So the Palestinians have thus become the upholders of international law, but it is, as Dr. Mazen Masri of City University put it, international law plus that we are after. We are after a legal regime that goes beyond what is being asked for in the international legal documents. It's a starting point. It's a framework that we uphold, and as such we aspire to social justice and to anti-settler colonial, as we do with anti-settler colonial, anti-apartheid movements globally. Okay, so that's just on the background. If I could have the next slide. So this slide, what I'm showing here is, I'm sure, I hope you're able to read some of the text there. So again, it's a slightly longer quote from this Jamjoon, reclaiming the political dimension of the Palestinian narrative. And what he's saying here is, wherever foreign, I'll just read it in case you can't read it, whether foreign domination has been involved, wherever foreign domination has been involved, anti-colonial nationalist currents have invariably come to the fore, often bearing a narrative that imagines an idyllic, pre-colonial and anachronistically national past. So there's this visualization of the past that exists. This past, the narrative tells us, was severed by the brutality of the colonizer and can only be defeated by a heroic anti-colonial struggle that brings about liberation. Such liberation is most often imagined in the form of an independent, sovereign, and invariably national state. Okay, so that is like the standard model. I'm not necessarily saying that that is outdated, but that is the traditional model. So maybe this slide should be titled Traditional Narratives. The next quote that I have is with regards to an expectation of a narrative when it comes to the Palestinians. And it's a quote from an anthropological book by Elias Khoury, Before the Mountains Disappear, which is saying that, where he's talking about going to Gaza with some playwrights. This is during the first Intifada, and they are interviewing Palestinians for the purpose of developing a play. And what he notices with them is the absence of inquiry into other aspects of these individuals' lives. And he says, these two playwrights that he's with, and it's in no way a criticism of him. He talks about the catharsis of working with them and the positivity of their dedication to the cause. But he says they're interested in the Palestinian experience from a solely narrative perspective. They have clear objectives. They're interested in the Palestinian as a political victim. So it's a very limiting depiction of who a Palestinian is. Then the last line of quote is from Etel Adnan, who's saying that narration, as she sees it, is an outdated form. So this is more of a kind of stylistic pronouncement, and this is reflective of kind of where the modern sort of Anglo-Saxon novel has been going since the Second World War. So there's been a movement away from having a kind of a traditional form of storytelling to having more, to it being more of a subject of experimentation. And this has made it very difficult, I would argue, for writers who have a political issue that they wish to put across, maybe not so bluntly as in a message, but in a way that carries and mobilizes and explains the cause, to write in a way that is evaluated with the right tools of critique. So if we could just move to slide 5, that'd be great. Okay, so just in terms of what we're up against and how I see the current situation, I think the work of Achille Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosopher, is something that really resonated with me. And at the conference where I first met Professor Klemscher, one of the speakers there from South Africa was saying that maybe this term apartheid that we're kind of clinging on to, that we're now, not clinging on to, but we're now really lobbying and behind since the human rights organizations of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Al-Haq, and B'Tselem have all declared there to be an apartheid state. This is a word that we're very keen to inject into the Palestinian narrative and narratives around Palestine to reframe and to make clear the power imbalance. And I stand by that. But what this person from South Africa was saying is maybe this term is not enough, because what is being experienced under occupation is far harsher. As Desmond Tutu once said, it's almost made apartheid South Africa seem like a bit of a picnic compared to what the Palestinians are living under. And so these other sort of add-ons that I was playing around with, one is techno and the other is necro-apartheid. When using the part, I mean, techno is self-explanatory, but necropolitics, which is the use of social and political power to dictate how some people may live and how some must die. So it's the creation of a sort of death worlds, or new unique forms of existence that confer upon them the status almost of the living dead. So as Ishil Mbembe says, in the context of Palestine, colonial occupation not only amounts to, can you switch the slide, please? It's like control and surveillance, but also, and then the next slide, these ones are quite quick, separation, and then on to the next slide. But it's also synonymous with isolation, okay? So it's a splintering occupation, which keeps with the splintering urbanism characteristic of late modernity, of suburban enclaves and gated communities. Okay, so this is where we're at now. So then can we go to the next slide, please? Which is again drawing, this is something seems to have been lost in that slide, but anyway, it's the extraction and looting of natural resources. And so as political categories, populations are then disaggregated, this is what Mbembe says, into rebels. And then could you go to the next slide? These are the categories of people: child soldiers, victims, the next one, refugees, and the next one, and the incapacitated. So these were his categories that he felt. And this one, it says, these people who are incapacitated through mutilation or simply massacred on the model of ancient sacrifices, while after enduring horrific exodus, the survivors get confined in camps and zones of exception. So what Mbembe was doing, and he does refer specifically to Palestine, but he's been drawing global patterns of treatment of the non-person, the person who is at the receiving end of this, of necropolitics, as he describes it. Please switch slide, please. So you end up with this, and I know that Samar Abdel Noor has written on this, these areas where Palestinians are being used as there's this horrible phenomena of like a sort of lab-like vocabulary, laboratory-like vocabulary, which is used around the Gaza Strip. And in the recent bombardments a couple of weeks ago, there were again accounts of new bombs seeming and weaponry being tried. So together, the cumulative imagery that starts to come out of Palestine is one of which somewhere which has been trashed as a brutalized image, a prevention of beauty, of harmony, of cultural development that has been a systematic result of de-development. Could we then move on to the next image? So in terms of the way that images are manipulated, and this is something that just, it's such a huge topic, but it's something that I consider to be really important when you're thinking about the Palestinian cause, the depiction of the Arab world, the self-depiction of the Arab world, and the kind of narratives that are being built. But it fascinates me how in the middle of the 20th century, you had two things happening almost coterminously. One was you had the introduction of the figurative image into the Arab world, which was due to, which Abdel Fattah Cleto talks about in his book, The Clash of Images, where you've had a lack of physical depictions of people for religious reasons, and a lack of the moving image, again, due to technological reasons. Until the 1950s, with Western influences, this starts to change. That also coincides with the growth of Hollywood, and the influence of Israel on Hollywood is something that anyone in the Arab world is or who's sensitive to Palestinians or observer of cinema has been aware of for a very long time. But this recent book on Hollywood and Israel, which came out from Columbia University Press, explains just quite how deep, how systematic, how structured, how well funded, and how well organized the interplay was between pro-Israeli groups in Hollywood and filmmakers. So you've got the two things happening at the same time. From having a lack of images, there is suddenly a glut of moving images, well-funded, with high production values, which generally show not just the Palestinians, but the Arab people as a whole in a very negative light. Usual stereotypes being as terrorists, etc. So we're now, as storytellers, as people developing narratives from the Arab world, we're trying to counter this influx of negative depictions and consistently negative representations. And the coincidence, the way that some of these big studios were instrumental in the Nakba of 1948, in filming, in obfuscating the true picture of the ethnic cleansing that took place, is something that is currently being exposed in film, and it's something that needs further research and inquiry. Could I have the next slide, please? So then we're going back to the sort of al-Ma'ari idea that what are we for, but also what are we against? So we can say, okay, all these things are against us. These are the negative depictions that have been made about us. But what Ibrahim Abu Lughod says is, okay, so to solely view Palestinians in contradistinction to British and Zionist representations of the Palestinian is also not positive. Okay, because we're just working against. It's a defensive position. So can I have the next slide? But there are many challenges. There are many challenges for anybody writing on Palestine or making a film about Palestine, which is that we have been subjected to a systematic process of erasure. So it's not just the villages, around 500 or so villages, which have been erased. You've also got, which are documented in Walid Khaldi's book, which I show there. You've got the libraries. There's a Jazeera documentary called The Great Book Robbery, about the libraries being, Palestinian libraries being taken. You've got land registry documents, which has disappeared. And then the Palestinian film archives. And I've got a picture there of my friend, the Palestinian filmmaker Hazal Hassan, who made a film about the disappearance of the film archives in Beirut in 1982. At the time she made that film, she was still looking to try and find out, and that's a shot of her trying to look for the films in a graveyard in Beirut. But since then, she has these films turned up in the Israeli military archives. So there has been theft on a grand scale and erasure. So we have very few images, and the ones in the Palestinian film archive were of the resistance movement. We have very few images of that. We also have very few of the expulsion of 48 and other things. So the responsibility is therefore to try and rebuild, to reimagine. So could I have the next slide, please? And one of the challenges which I looked at with my PhD was with regards to the interior. You see, these interior spaces, particularly female spaces, are particularly female in their nature. They're personal, private, female, domestic. They're intense. They're the place of love, longing, and desire being expressed. Okay, so these places were, if I could have the next slide, we've got many obstacles to being able to visualize, particularly early 20th century interior Palestinian spaces for a number of reasons. One is that many of the villages were destroyed. Two, there's a lack of images. So there wasn't much of a painting tradition, and the European tradition of sort of water paintings, etc., seems to have died out by the end of the 19th century. So early 20th century, there weren't that many people doing watercolors. Some of the watercolors that exist of the interior of Palestinian homes come from the end of the 19th century. Then photography Flash photography wasn't developed enough to take pictures of inside of homes as well. It was also because it seemed to be a female domain, a lot of visitors would not be able to go inside these houses to document lives there. There's a gender and a class bias often when it comes to Palestinian women villagers, and also in terms of the Palestinian storytelling about what life was like. Something Salim Tamari talks about is there's sometimes a sense of bravado or shame, and in terms of how these stories are recounted. Can I have the next slide, please? So how do we decolonize a narrative? You know, how do we rebuild a narrative? And a writer from Hawaii has put, Leuni has put these 4 points. One is rediscovery and recovery. Second one, mourning. Third one, dreaming. And the fourth, commitment. So could we go on to the first, please? Next slide. So the rediscovery and recovery is to find texts. And I did that with the novels of Soraya Antonius, which had fallen out of print and were not written about as part of Palestinian literature. Also, it's the retention of oral histories, which there's been increasing work about, and then the act of imagining those parts of the past that we do not have access to, that even narrators in their oral histories may not have felt confident to talk about. So Toni Morrison talks about methods that she uses when filling in the gaps with slave narratives to reimagine those parts of the story, of the life, that are shrouded in shame. So for example, physical assault or rape or sexual experiences, sometimes these aspects are not documented, and it's a responsibility of the novelist to sort of reimagine those. And in the process of doing that, my test is to try to see what is, not what is probable, but what could be possible, because to add to a storyline and make it work. Can we have the next slide, please? Then this was it was a separate project that I worked on, but it's in terms of visualizing the future. This was an anthology of writing on love and lust by Arab women, going from the pre-Islamic period to the current day. So I included 110 pieces by 72 writers from the Jahiliyyah period up to now, with a huge, there's like a 500-year period in the middle where there was no writing that I could find by Arab women on these subjects of romantic love or sexuality. Some of the earlier works, though, I found to be very sexually liberated and assertive. And it was just at times when interpretations of Islam were different, where there were different spaces allowed. But it's an example within the Palestinian context of just like how novelists or writers can work to find parts of the past, to visualize a different way for the future, which is sort of more organic than trying to think of change as always coming from outside necessarily, or being rejected because it might be identified as coming from external forces. Can I have the next slide, please? So the next point that Luni says, the Hawaiian writer, was about this issue of mourning, the need to mourn, to identify what happened, to bear witness to it. And a lot of writers, I don't think I'll have time here, but maybe in the Q&A, there are a lot of writers that I really admire who've taken it on to document what happened at different points in time of Palestinian history. So, yeah. The next, and I think, you're probably, most of the listeners will be familiar with the Saidian terms of reclaiming history and the importance of bearing witness. Can I have the next one, please? Yeah, so then dreaming. And then with dreaming, it's sort of like to go back to Jamtru and what he was saying about where are we going, And I was asked to contribute to this anthology on Palestinian science fiction, which I thought was like really quite a crazy idea when I was asked to do it. And what I found when I read the collection as a whole what I found writing it was that it was a real breakthrough for me to try to visualize something better. I think we're so locked into current events and mourning the past that sometimes we're not able to reconfigure our minds to think more positively. And the example that I often refer to here is the important work of decolonizing architecture and other similar projects which have taken, for example, and this is the picture over here to the far right, where they modeled buildings within the West Bank, for example, to say what would happen to this settlement if this land was given back to the Palestinians. What would we do with this watchtower? Can we turn it into, for example, a skate park? And by doing this, they, you know, when I first saw these exhibitions, I found it really I found myself rejecting them because I felt that this was a lot of money and effort being spent on something that was unlikely to happen. And when I felt myself doing that, I really caught myself and I realized how locked I'd become in terms of not being able to visualize something better for the future. And I think that is what is important about these projects like Palestinian science fiction, for example, because if Palestinian artists aren't able to visualize a better future, you know, to take the lead in that together with scientists and architects and as well as the politicians and the lawyers, you know, we need to start thinking differently about the space. And I would argue that the fictional narrative is freer to do so, you know, is less locked in, less subject to kind of backlash than the legal and the political. So we have more freedom to let our minds go free about what we would like for the future. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so then just on this point of commitment that is raised by Lueni as like the last point on this, it's just, I think there's often the anticipation that if you read a Palestinian novel, it will tell you what the Palestinian narrative is. It will be a rallying call for action in terms of in the ways that we want, and this is sometimes present, and it's what I'm saying is no way a criticism of those novels which are more traditional in approach and those which are perhaps more personal, but some of these novels, I think that they enable people to commit because what they have in them is a statement of what we believe in, or a statement, or like descriptions as to how people coped with difficult situations. So, for example, the love of family that comes across so strongly in Heba Hayek's beautiful new novel about a memoir, and it's a memoir set in Gaza here, or the humor found in Mazen Ma'rouf's short stories set in the camps of Lebanon, or the preaching, or the very assertive line in Rafif Ziada's poems We Teach Life, as well as the bravery and huge humor and daring of Suad Amari in this book, Nothing to Lose But Your Life, where she dresses up as a young Palestinian worker and crosses the border, crosses into Israel from the occupied territories with these young men who are seeking work in Israel, being shot at, etc. in the process. It's a very short book, but within it you get so much of an understanding as to what the situation is. And the thing that I often think is that it's impossible to measure the effect of literature or art in terms of individual inspiration or how it affects your actions, but it can sometimes be these depictions of people in Palestinian contexts who refuse to act in a way that is selfish and in their own, the easiest option for them to have an easier life, but make that moral choice to step into sort of greater action, to work with the collective and to do something better. And how that storyline can be charted, how delicately it is dealt with to tie in the reader or the viewer is requires great skill. And it's something that I think on the level of like activists going to the occupied territories, I think it's something about our society which we should be proud, because I think it's one of the reasons why people keep going back and keep wanting to engage with our way of seeing society. These are not depictions of society which are akin to some of the really bleak visions of people who just kind of sell each other out that you might find in maybe sort of Milan Kundra's The Joke, when he's looking at Eastern Europe. These are, yeah, so that's what I'd say on the point of commitment. Can I have the next slide? I think this is the last one. Yeah, so really just to go back to the point I was making previously in terms of the need to reimagine the past as a way to rebuild the future through the Palestinian fictional narrative. And to conclude, I would say that we still very much need a political narrative, and a lot of guidance is being given to us through the developing and strengthening of the legal narrative and the work being done in civil society and through collective social experiences and but what the fictive narrative does is to provide a freer space, to provide a pleasurable entry point, to entertain whilst informing, and hopefully also to uplift. Thank you. That's a bibliography that I can send on later.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Mas al khair, depending on where you are joining us from. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Arlene for the kind invitation to speak today. It's really a great honor for me to be here alongside Dr. Salma Dabagh as we bring this remarkable course to a close. Before I begin, I would like to explain that the subject and the structure of this class, or better saying of this talk, have evolved significantly since its beginning. I mean, since Professor Arlene and I first talked about it. So as a result, the material I presented back in the initial stages may not entirely align with the current title of this class or talk, which is Palestine as Literature. This topic was inspired by the writer and intellectual Elias Khoury, who frequently emphasizing this idea in his books, interviews, and discussions. Well, as you know, Khoury is joining us today, and it is an honor to have him here, allowing us to conclude this course on a high note, or as we say in Brazil, with a golden key. Although Mr. Khoury requires no formal introduction, I would like to provide a brief overview of his work for those who may not be familiar or not that familiar with it. I must note, however, that summarizing his achievements in a few words isn't an easy task due to the depth and breadth of his contributions. Elias Khoury was born in Beirut in 1948, the year of the Nakba. But for Khoury, Nakba is not a past event, but it is a continuous, ongoing process. This notion will be further explored shortly by me, but perhaps with more details by Elias himself. Initially, Khoury established himself as a literary critic, and in addition to his books on literary criticism, he wrote short stories, plays, and of course, novels. He served as an editor-in-chief of the cultural supplement Al-Nahar, the Lebanese newspaper, and now he holds the position of editor-in-chief at the Journal of Palestine Studies. Among the many prizes he was awarded, and because I don't have a lot of time, let me highlight only one of them, which is the UNESCO Prize for Arab Culture, acknowledging his efforts in promoting Arab culture and introducing it to the world. Currently, Khoury writes a weekly article published in Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Additionally, as I said, he serves as the managing editor of Shu'un Falastiniya, which is Palestine Affairs. As an academic, Khoury has taught at several prestigious universities, including New York University in the United States, the University of Poitiers in France, the University of London in the UK, the University of Berlin in Germany, and the University of Zurich in Switzerland. In Lebanon, he has taught at the Lebanese American University, the Lebanese University, and the American University of Beirut. In May 2023, which is this year, the American University of Beirut granted him an honorary Doctor of Human Letters. Among his many novels, 13 so far, let me mention a few of them by their English titles for those who might want to read the translations. So I will start with Little Mountain in 1977, White Masks in 1981, The Journey of Little Gandhi in 1989, The Kingdom of Strangers in 1993, and in 1998, Gate of the Sun, the English title for the Arabic Bab Shams and the Portuguese Porta do Sol. For this novel, Elias Khoury was awarded the Palestine Prize. And the novel was named Best Book of the Year by Le Monde Diplomatique, the Christian Science Monitor, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and as a notable book by the New York Times. After that, Khoury published in 2002, Yalo, also translated into Portuguese. In 2007, As Though She Were Sleeping. In 2014, Broken Mirrors or Sinalkal. And now I'm going to jump till 2016, when the first book of his trilogy, Children of the Ghetto, entitled My Name is Adam, was published. The Brazilian edition, translated into Portuguese, Meu Nome é Adam, was published last year by Editora Tabla. The second book of this trilogy was issued in 2018, entitled Stella Maris, which I just concluded its translation into Portuguese. And the third and last part of the trilogy was recently issued in Arabic, and soon it will be haunting me, so I will start translating it at the end of this year, hopefully, inshallah. Well, Palestine as a subject dominates several of Khoury's novels, such as The Kingdom of Strangers and Though She Were Sleeping, but it was with the publication of Gate of the Sun in 1998 that he achieved worldwide fame as one of those who wrote and are writing Palestine. And to talk about that, in the short time I have, I'll briefly summarize the two novels, Gate of the Sun and children of the ghetto, especially in the first part, my name is Adam, so that I can raise the ideas of Palestine as literature. So, Gate of the Sun, what is it about? Gate of the Sun is often referred to as a sweeping saga of the Palestinian people, set against the background of the events that unfolded after the 1948 Nakba. The story takes place in a deserted and improvised hospital in the Shatila camp in the periphery of Beirut, where two men, Khalil and Yunus, remain alone. Khalil takes care of Yunus, a revered leader of Palestinian resistance, and has fallen into a coma. As Khalil tries to revive him, he begins to tell stories that branch out into the experiences of various individuals. These stories combine the expulsion of people from their villages in Al Jalil, the following massacres, the strength of those who survived, and of course, the power of love. Elias Khoury weaves together tales of displacement, of fear, of hope, of survival, of loss, and of dreams, humanizing the complex struggle of the Palestinian people and giving voice for their collective narrative. So, is it about telling or narrating the past? We will try to find out a little bit ahead. Well, almost 19 years after Gate of the Sun, Khoury published the first part of the novel, Children of the Ghetto, My Name is Adam. And what is this novel about? Well, it's not an easy task to summarize this novel, but I may say that is about Adam Danoun, a Palestinian man from Lid who grows uncertain regarding his identity. When he was a little boy, he was adopted by a young widow named Manal, who kept telling him his father was a hero, but later he will know he was not even Hassan Danoun's son. Well, Adam spent his early childhood in Lid, in the ghetto of Lid, a place encircled by barbed wires created by the occupying army that was before moving to Haifa with his mother and her husband, where he stayed until he turned 15. Then he lived on his own, facing so many different and hard sides of reality. When Adam realizes he wasn't Jewish, he played with his identity to go along with his life. He claimed to be from the Warsaw Ghetto. However, later in New York, he meets Ma'mour, a blind man who saved him during the death caravan in Lid in 1948, when he was a baby, and Ma'mour provoked Adam during this meeting to re-examine his identity and write his life story. How? Well, Adam, by that time, was a journalist who was fond of literature and hoped to write a novel with connotations and symbols like Ghassan Kanafani's. However, after separating from his Israeli girlfriend, Dalia, and immigrating to New York, Adam decided to write about Waddah al-Yaman, a poet from the Umayyad period who ended up buried alive in a coffer without shouting or struggling for his life. as in Khanafani's Men in the Sun, in which the three men didn't knock while were suffocating in the tank. But when Adam, now quoting Elias himself, realizes the power of art and metaphor to falsify reality, he abandoned the idea of writing novels and instead focused on writing his life story in a clear and simple way. Well, Adam, who didn't live his story through his own memory, but through the memory of others who had lived through the experience of Nakba, such as his mother Manal and Ma'mun and so many others, wasn't sure if what he was writing was a novel or even if it was worth publishing. So he kept writing for himself. Then, by another chance, the novel fell into the hands of a writer who admires it and decided to publish it. And this writer is Elias Khoury, who made himself a character in the novel and claims to write the story as a reader of it. And what does Khoury want to tell or to say? Is he trying to write the history of Nakba through literature? Well, to find out together, I would like now to bring to your attention a short dialogue that happened between Adam, the narrator, and a Palestinian historian who wanted to know more about Adam's grandfather, who was a soldier in the Ottoman army and fought on the Russian front during the First World War. The historian hopes to prove some historical point, and all he needed was just one document testifying it. So the Palestinian historian says, history has to rest on written document, preferably official documents. Adam was shocked by this declaration, so he said, what kind of nonsense is that? The whole history of our Nakba is unwritten. Does that mean we don't have a history? That there was no Nakba? But then Adam thought, if it is a document he needs, well then, why not simply add a passage to a letter written by his grandfather proving the historical theory? So the historian asked, is that true? And Adam answered, as good as true. The historian commented, that's writer's business, not historians. And Adam asked, what's the difference? The historian then shook his head in disgust and walked off. This dialogue is from the English translation by the late Humphrey Davies. So how can we set differences between both? I mean, between the historian and the writer. As we can see, the Palestinian historian, in My Name is Adam, believes that only written history is significant and that it is necessary to create a written record to oppose the Zionist narrative. But Khoury considers that if we do that, it means we are accepting the oppressor's terms, since the winners are those who typically write the history. Khoury tells that during his research, he discovered that there was almost no mention of the ghettos in the historical records. But this absence doesn't mean that the events didn't happen. So this highlights the difference between the writer's job and that of the historian, who can only work with what is present, while the writer has has the task of making absences present. This means that the writer's job is not to fill the gaps in the historical records, but to make those gaps visible and to explore what it means to live in the presence of absence, في حضرة الغياب. So quoting Khoury now, the gaps of the historical record are also gaps in the people's lives. And one way to deal with the pain of those absences is to remain silent. So Khoury, as a writer, aims to explore how Palestinians have managed to survive the history of Nakba by preserving silence and secrets and by fixing together fragments to make them meaningful and significant in the present. Khoury claims always, Holocaust literature had happened, what means it is memory. Nakba literature is not a literature of memory. The literature of Nakba is the literature of the present. I think these are topics that might be detailed or mentioned by Khoury himself. So to sum it up, according to Elias Khoury, the writer's business is not to tell or to narrate stories of the past, but to try to be adequate to a present that it is itself disordered or messy, and it is reduced with the absence of a history that is still making itself felt. And it is exactly what Khoury did in both novels I've mentioned here, and does by writing literature, by writing Palestinian literature, and yet by writing Palestine. And now, before I pass the word to Elias Khoury, I'd like to finish by quoting him once more. I don't know if those are the exact words, but it's something like this. Palestine is an idea, not only a lost land or history, but it is also a major human idea. And it is literature that made and developed this idea and transcended it into the deep human sense. And now I will finish with this idea. Perhaps it will be detailed by Khoury himself, who is responsible of it also, which is Palestinian literature shows us that the story is more important than history. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Safa. I will rapidly thank Salma before Safa also. Safa, thank you very much for preparing the floor in such a thoughtful and in-depth way to receive Elias Khoury, which we welcome now.
Hello. Are you hearing me?
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'll leave you the floor, Elias Khoury.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you. First, actually, after the lecture of Salma and the very interesting lecture of Salma and the very beautiful words of Safa, I think there is very little left to me to say. As the ancient Arab poet used to say at the beginning of one of the mu'allaqat, the poets did not leave anything for me to speak. So this problem that nothing is left to say is a very old problem. And all the time we think that we have nothing to say, and then we try to say, and sometimes things will emerge. So I hope after what you have heard, something will emerge which you can feel is interesting. The second thing, I will be very brief because now 1 hour and 10 minutes since we began this session, and I suppose it's too long. Anyway, and I just want to begin with what Safa said before I go to the major idea I'm going to develop and to defend here, which is the struggle between the story and history. And I think when we speak about decolonizing Palestine, Israel, when we speak about decolonizing this, the whole theme of decolonizing lacks a very important issue, which is this struggle between story, which is told by the oppressed, and history, which is written by the bankers. And I'm sure that the story will win in the last analysis. And this is what Shahrazad taught us more than 1,000 years ago, in her struggle with the story in order to win the battle against power and against masculinity, and to introduce to literature this feminine touch, which makes from literature, I suppose. So the struggle between the story and history can be the theme of the whole Palestinian saga, the whole Palestinian tragedy, which has been a very long one of the longest in modern history. The Israeli colonization of Palestine is the longest colonization ever. And now Israel is the last colonial power on earth. And the Palestinian territories are the last occupied territories on earth. Edward Said introduced to us the post-colonial theory, the post-colonial analysis. But here in Palestine, we are in the colonialist analysis. And the colonialist analysis, which is taking the shape now, which is declaring its shape as an apartheid. But I suppose that from the beginning it was an apartheid. Now, the problem of the Nakba and the problem of telling the story of the Nakba is a big problem. Because how can we read or tell an unfinished story? The stories are interpreted and reread from their end. The end is the real beginning that sheds the light on the meaning and determines the ways of understanding. What happens when we are reading an unfinished book? And how can we read and understand a story that is still in the making? This is the problem of writers and scholars with the Palestinian Nakba. They reread while writing, and instead of telling the story, they will become part of it. Was Ghassan Kanafani a storyteller, or was the hero of an unwritten story? Writers become protagonists, heroes become writers, and the story goes on. I will start with a personal story. September 16, 1983, I went to the Shatila refugee camp to participate in the first annual commemoration of the massacres. In 1982, there was one of the biggest massacres of the Nakba, which took place in the Shatila camp, where 1,500 people were assassinated by the phalangists, but under the supervision and under the the orders of the Israeli occupying army of Beirut. I walked towards the camp under the smooth rain of the beginning of autumn. It was the first time since the Israeli invasion of the city I felt the smell of the earth awakened by the first rain. Sadness and despair surrounded my soul. The fall of Beirut made me feel that I'm a stranger in my city. The resistance and the international pressure obliged the Israeli army to withdraw from the city. The remnants of the Lebanese army took over with the presence of an American, French, Italian military international force. At that time, the Lebanese army was under the control of a government led by President Amin Shmayyel, a leader of the Falante party that committed the massacre, with the collaboration of the Israeli army. I went to the mourning camp to share sadness and helplessness with the Palestinians of Galilee, who faced a terrible massacre that reminded them of the atrocities they faced in their villages, destroyed and evacuated by force in 1948. Near the Kuwaiti embassy, I heard strange sounds coming from the camp. To my astonishment, I found myself in the midst of a huge group of black-dressed women who were waving Palestinian flags and trilling as if they were in a wedding. What was going on? Women were singing and celebrating. I thought that it was a dream, and what I was witnessing was not real. I asked a woman, what was going on? We won, she shouted. What? I asked. We have now a cemetery for our children. At last, we won. She left me alone and joined the group, which was heading towards the end of the main street in the camp. I walked with them to find myself facing a piece of empty land that had no signs. This was the collective cemetery of 1,500 victims of one of the horrible massacres of the Nakba. I am not going to tell you the long and tragic story of this cemetery, which became a dump during the savage war of the camps 1986, and how a group of Palestinian and Lebanese activists cleaned it to make from it the site of the commemoration of 50 years of the Nakba in 1998. What perplexed me was the word used by the woman when she referred to the cemetery as a victory, and I had to wait 9 years to understand her words. During my work on my novel Gate of the Sun, to collect the stories of the war of the Nakba of 1948, which I began in Shatila, I understood the trauma of the absence of cemeteries in the lives of the refugees that witnessed the catastrophe of 1948. People left their dead beloved ones without burial, either because they were unable to bury them under fire and orders to leave their villages, or because the occupying army used to choose a group of young men and execute them in order to create an atmosphere of terror. The trauma that took place in Palestine will be revived in 1982 in Beirut, after the massacre, where the dead bodies were left stinking in the alleys of the camp for several days before the Red Cross collected them. Jean Genet, the French writer, in his masterwork 4 Hours in Shatila, described the aftermath of the massacre with words that went beyond words in order to find an adequate language to name pain. But the French writer couldn't see the significance of the bodies of the victims who were left in the alleys of the camp and their abilities to awaken the memories of 1948. Are we speaking about a memory that refuses to be forgotten? Are the bodies of the Palestinian militants buried in the so-called cemeteries of numbers in neglected areas a memory? In addition, what about the bodies imprisoned in the Israeli morgues? Is this the past or the present? Are the massacres of Lidda and Tantura and Sa'sa a memory? Why the Palestinians are obliged to speak about the present while they are trying to remember the past? In this complicated relationship between the past and the present, we have to invent new concepts. The Palestinian Nakba is not a past to be remembered, but a way of life under occupation. When we speak about the Nakba, we are not speaking about an event that took place for the last time in 1948. Rather, we are speaking about a long process that began in 1948 and is taking place since then. History of this ongoing Nakba is not linear. It witnessed different phases, but never stopped. We can detect its peaks in the years 1948, 1967, 1982, 2002, and 2023. These peaks represent major events, but they cannot overshadow a daily life with land confiscation that never stopped under a military regime and transforming the major Palestinian cities into ghettos. The term continuous Nakba emerged in two stages. The first was during my research in order to write my two novels, The Gate of the Sun and The Children of the Ghetto. In Gate of the Sun, I understood the problematic of trauma and shame that silenced the victims. I found myself before waves of stories never written, as if I was discovering what everybody knew and is unable to tell. On the other hand, I understood that the refugees saw the relationship between their tragedy of the past and their tragedy of the present. Operation Peace for Galilee, that ended up with the occupation of Beirut and Shatila's massacre, made the refugees from the villages of Galilee relive 1948 in Beirut, 1982. Whereas Children of the Ghetto introduced me first to the lives of the Palestinians in Israel, named present absentees by the Israeli law as a juridical strange term to facilitate the confiscation of their land. On the other hand, it led me to understand the atrocities of occupation through my journey to Jenin and Nablus. The second stage was in 2010. During a long conversation with my friend, the Syrian writer and filmmaker Ali Atasi, we were discussing the courageous political and intellectual work of the Syrian intellectuals in their struggle against the Assad despotic regime, a struggle that will pave the way for the Syrian popular uprising against the regime in 2011. During our attempts to understand why the Syrian opposition is not finding the echoes it deserves in the Arabic intellectual life, my friend asked me why Palestine has a privileged status in the Arab consciousness. The question perplexed me because all the classical answers, such as the Arab national identity or Islam or dignity and so on and so forth, seemed irrelevant. Of course, these issues played a role and or were used by the Arab despotic regimes, but cannot be the answer. We cannot summarize Palestine by national and mythical concepts. I started relating stories of the Nakba that I wrote or was planning to write. At that point, I discovered that the line that collects all the elements of the Palestinian near past and present is the Nakba as a continuous process. The term was coined in a lecture I gave in the Institute for Advanced Studies in Berlin, May 2011, and published by the journal Critical Inquiry, Winter 2012, under a new title, Rethinking the Nakba. How can we read an unfinished book? Constantin Zre, the Syrian historian, coined the term Nakba in his book, The Meaning of the Nakba, published in 1948 during the War of Palestine. This term will become a name, and the name will give the Palestinian catastrophe its specificity and will become the first Palestinian word that will enter all the languages. What Zre and the Arab national movement did not realize was the nature of this Nakba and its historical context. The Arab awakening, to use the words of George Antonius, will take the form of a movement led by military coups and dictatorships, which meant that the idea that the Arab world can encircle the Nakba in order to put an end to it became impossible. The major and unbelievable transformations in 78% of Palestinian land, ethnic cleansing, destruction of most of the Palestinian villages, replacement of the population, was not the end of the story. It was its beginning. During 19 years of military rule in Israel, the Palestinians faced a silent continuation of their Nakba. Land was confiscated, peasants lost their ways of life, and the Palestinian name disappeared. What was perceived as a tragic historical event became a process. The ongoing Nakba is not only the result of a pragmatic Israeli policy that will be declared gradually after the occupation of 1967, but it was also the outcome of the failure of the Arab despotic regimes. The Arabic failure will be the first sign of the decadence of the Arab world, with the destruction of the Arab major political cultural centers, Beirut, Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus. An Arab world led by the Gulf despotic states will lead the Arabs to the Abrahamic Accords that gave Israel a free hand in the occupied Palestinian territories. The Nakba is an open and unfinished book. My suggestion is to read it through the question I will call through misunderstanding. What is this misunderstanding? I want to confess that the imaginary of the atrocities in Palestine goes beyond literature. I used to think that the term present absent could be a metaphorical situation in an absurd play written by Eugene Ionesco. But the Israeli establishment created from it a legal term. In the stories of the Nakba related by its victims, we have to believe the unbelievable and to adapt ourselves to the fact that the borders between the real and the imaginary are destroyed. In the fall of Sa'sa, related by Ilan Pape, we will face the double meaning of fire. Esh in Hebrew. The term Esh in Hebrew means fire. The word fire will show that behind misunderstanding, we discover the supremacy of the language of the victor. The story happened in February 14, 1948, when the Palestinian village Sa'sa was invaded by the Palmach, the elite unit of the Haganah, precursor of the Israeli Defense Forces. The villagers did not resist, but 35 houses were destroyed and 60 to 80 people were killed. Israeli historian Ilan Pape describes the incidents, drawing on a report by the commander of the battalion responsible for the attack. His name was Moshe Kalman. Moshe Kalman says the order was very clear. You have to blow up 20 houses and kill as many warriors as possible. We ran into an Arab guard, Kalman recounted later. He was so surprised that he did not ask, Min hada. In Arabic, Min hada means, who is it? But asked, Esh hada. What is it? One of our troops who knew Arabic responded humorously, Hada Esh. Hada in Arabic means this is, and Ish in Hebrew means fire, and shot a volley into him. The deadly reply was a mirror of the ambiguity of language, and the ways in which the response was understood and misunderstood is a mixture of knowledge and arrogance. Real bloodshed and imaginary projections reflect the intricate interdependence of identity that comes into play in the conquest of Palestine by the Zionist movement. In this way of juggling with words and blood, is this way of juggling with words and blood a mere misunderstanding? Ish, the Hebrew word for fire, will be played 74 years later in the West Bank town of Hawara. On March 6, 2023, the Israeli settlers celebrated the Yom Purim by re-attacking and dancing in the streets of Hawara, a Palestinian town near Nablus in the West Bank, which was attacked and burned by the settlers in February 25, 2023. The story of Yom Purim, as related in the Tanakh, is a metaphor, and its celebration is symbolic. But when metaphor is understood as history, and its rituals related to the massacres in the Persian Empire after the death of Haman, take off their metaphorical dress and become real, then the rituals will become a sign of savagery. In Hawara, the bullet of Sa'sa will become real fire, and the festival will take the shape of a wild dance performed by the settlers and the Israeli soldiers. The misunderstanding of 48 and the double meaning of the word Ish will take a new dimension. Fire will become real and will take us back to the barrels of explosions thrown by the Palmach on the village of Ain Zaytun in 1948. The memory of understanding will become a memory of fear. Yom Purim this year took us back to the same festival of death 19 years ago, when the memory of Yom Purim was in February 25th, 1994. That same day, a settler from Kiryat Arba'a, the Kahanist physician Baruch Goldstein, entered the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron while people were praying and opened fire, killing 95 worshippers. The fire will continue on July 31, 2015, when a group of settlers entered the Palestinian village of Douma, burned the Dawabshi family house, and killed an 18-month baby and his two parents. Fire is not a metaphor as represented by Aleph Bet Yehoshua in his novella Facing the Forests. It is the untold story of the mute Palestinian peasant whose village was destroyed and whose tongue was cut. Misunderstanding is not ignorance, but it is, as formulated by Edward Said in Orientalism, a way of domination. Misunderstanding has long been used as a literary device and as a means of domination. Its literary connotations are far removed from its political impact, but they are complementary. Edward Said convincingly describes the many ways in which Western misunderstandings, deliberate and otherwise, have constructed a picture of deprived civilizations of their identities. In the novella of Este Kharbet Khiz'a, published in 1949, the Israeli author opened the page of the Nakba in Israeli literature. It is the most revealing Israeli text regarding the complexity of the conquest of Palestine. This text will take the reader to the limits where understanding and misunderstanding will meet. The story leads us to discover two major elements. The first is the silenced victims. The inhabitants of this poor village have no voice in the novella, and the reader will have no hint about what they said, as if they are characters in a silent movie. We hear them only once, when a woman holding her baby girl, approaches the Israeli soldiers, asking them to take the baby. Why we do not hear the victims? These are not shadows, like Aziz and Khalil in Amos Oz's by Michael. And their tongues were not cut, as in the case of the Palestinian in facing the forest. These are peasants living in their own village. There are two answers to this question. Either the narrator did not hear them, or he was unable to understand their Arabic tongue. Most probably, the two answers are correct, and this novel will create the paradigm of the silent Palestinian, or the shadow, that will dominate the Israeli literature. The second is the creation of the image of the Palestinian as the Jew of the Jew. This novella uses the European anti-Semitic terminology to describe the Jews in order to describe the Palestinians. The Palestinians are now the biblical Jews, and they are waiting the lamentation of their own prophets. The paradigm of Izhar will be reproduced in a different way by the Palestinian writer Ghassan Kanafani in his novella Men in the Sun. The three Palestinians lived death in a water tank in order to be smuggled from Iraq to Kuwait. They died under the heavy sun of the desert in August, while the driver was trying to finish the paperwork with the Kuwaiti border policemen who were interested in asking an impotent Palestinian about his sexual adventures in Basra. When Abu al-Khayzaran, this is the name of the driver, opened the water tank to discover the bodies of the poor three men, we will hear a terrible voice asking why they did not knock. Hello, what's going on? Shit. Oh my God. It was cut. I don't know what happened. Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes, we are hearing you.
I don't know what happened.
We can hear you, Elias.
Yeah, I continue. Now. Where were we? I don't remember. Okay. This question will be crucial in creating the Palestinian consciousness of the necessity of resistance. But I want to question the statement itself. But why if they have knocked and nobody heard them? The major question is about the deafness of the Arab world and the decision of the colonial European forces not to hear, because they were washing their hands from the Jewish blood with the Palestinian blood. The issue is not only about the silence of victims. More precisely, it's about silencing them. The tongues were not cut, but the ears were deaf. On another level, Edward Said's declaration that he is the last intellectual Jew goes beyond the theoretical questions, because it can be a tool to describe the exile of the Palestinians in their own land. The Galot will become the Manfa of the Palestinians. What unites the Palestinians living in their own land and the Palestinian diaspora is this feeling that all of them are in exile. Emil Habibi, in his parody, The Best Optimist, will describe the exile of his protagonist Saeed in the Jewish state, an exile which took his collaboration to a dead end and which will make from him a voice of the resistance. As you see, I tried to give an overall, of course, it's very, there are many things to be said, especially there are many related to the Palestine and to the Arab story, the Palestinian story, especially through the poems of the great poet of Palestine, Mahmoud Darwish, and through other works, Nafani, Jabram, and Akram Salih, young novelist, Ademir Shubli, and others. But actually, what to show here is that we are facing an ongoing process, and we have to deal with it the way it is. That we have to deal with it as a long struggle. And in the long struggle, the Palestinians must understand that they are alone. They are encircled not only by the Israeli occupation, but also by the Arab despotic regimes. They are not, their image is not destroyed only by the American propaganda, but their image is also destroyed in the Arab world. The Nakba, we feel it in Al-Za'atar refugee camp, in Yarmouk refugee camp. We feel it everywhere in the Arab world. And we have to, the Palestinians have to rethink their approach as a long struggle, very difficult struggle. A struggle against a racist colonial force, a struggle against apartheid, which is now dominating the land of Palestine, and a struggle to not only to save their life, or not only to save their dignity. It's a struggle to save for the idea of truth. And I think the idea of truth will liberate everybody. If the idea of truth liberates the Palestinians, I'm sure it will also liberate the Jews. Now, if things now are taking the shape of a wave of right-wing fascist, ultra-nationalist, religious situation in Israel, this is not the end of the world. It's a phase of it, and we have to continue. And the main thing here, which is also related to my work as a writer, the main thing is that we have to continue to write. Writing is a way of living. Writing literature is not only to express or to represent, it's to live. Like resistance in Palestine now, it's a way of life. It's a way to live. And in this sense, new ideas will emerge, which will give our lives meaning, although we are surrounded by death. And here I want to conclude by speaking about a friend of mine, a great writer, whose name is Walid Daqqa. Walid Daqqa is an Israeli since 37 years, because he was a Fidai. Now he is one of the great writers of Palestine. And now he is facing the possibility of death in jail after doctors discovered that he has cancer in his bones and in his everywhere. And the Israelis are insisting not to release him. And what Walid told me that he is the most afraid of is that not only he will die in prison, but also is that, the Palestinian prisoners in Israel, when they die, their bodies are not given to their families to be buried. Their bodies are put in the morgues till the end of their punishment. So we have now one prisoner who has been in the morgue since 40 years. And now in Palestine, we have 13 Palestinian militants who are continuing their sentences in the morgues. To these people, I think our words cannot save them, but it can be a carpet that they can walk on it. And thank you. خلاص.
Well, I guess the best way to begin is to thank you, Elias, for that speech, for your words, for your presentation. I'd like to call back Safa and Selma, please. Personally, I'd like to say that very rapidly, I mean, it's not only a highly elaborated speech we just heard from you, Elias, but a very one that we feel very deeply, on our bodies, I would say. I would actually go to that point. So our role now is to bring out the questions from the students and allow also Selma, Safa to interact with Elias with your own questions that you might have. Okay, the first question I have from a student, while Selma and Safa can think of their own question, is this one. Well, the student asks, in your book, My Name is Adam, you say something, I wonder if he fell, if he can hear us. He had an internet connection problem. I think he's trying to come back. He did comment before that he had an unstable internet. We'll wait a bit.
Maybe, Arlene, you can see if there is another question. So, he's trying to come.
Yeah.
Oh, welcome back.
No, I'm
Welcome
fine.
So
It's a problem of this is Beirut. I'm sorry. I would have liked to be somewhere else.
No problem.
This is how it is. We have to. I really was astonished that it worked all the time, except some small. Because normally it's worse than that.
right.
And Safa knows this very well.
Yeah, I know that. So let's go.
Right. So the first question that I received here from the students is, okay, in your book, Elias, My Name is Adam, you say something like, the literature came to forge a new language for the victim, to proclaim a literature of silence and to take us with Darwish to where the wind blows. Could you comment on this?
This is Darwish.
Look, the problem with writers is that they ask us to comment on what the heroes say. I really don't know. You have to ask Adam, and I'm not Adam. This is what Adam told me, actually. Actually, when you write about a character like Adam, who's a very problematic and interesting, he is a very close friend of mine. When you write something about that, you have to work a lot to understand. And my understanding, which may not be the true meaning, the real meaning of the sentence, it can have other meanings. My understanding is that silence is a way of resistance. Sometimes you have words cannot fulfill. There are no words. Pain has no words. When we think about pain, we remember pain. Remembering pain is not pain. But when you are in real pain, you don't speak. You shout, you cry, I don't know what. This is what Adam was trying to say, we are in real pain. So our silence is much more eloquent than any words. And what writers have to try to find words that can represent that a little bit. They cannot totally represent pain. That can approach pain, that can understand pain. This is the first thing. The second thing, silence is part of a trauma, as you know. And I remember once when I was working on Gate of the Sun, when a woman came after so long, it was so difficult to make people speak about their experience, and she told us about her kid. She left her kid in the forest because she had 3 children and a baby, so she couldn't manage. She was alone. And then Hassan, one of the protagonists of Baby Shams, will collect the baby and give it to her back. This is a true story, actually. This was told by this woman. And of course, her name was not like this, and there was no Hassan, but nevertheless, when she began telling it, I felt how difficult it is. How can you tell that you threw your child? Nobody can tell it. And I felt after she finished telling me, I felt so bad, as if I was a torturer. As if I was torturing her. I have no right. So sometimes you feel that words have no right to approach moments like that. And for example, in My Name is Adam, when I tell the story of the Palestinians who were living in the ghetto and were obliged to work in Lidda by the Israeli army, and they were obliged to steal their own homes.
Yeah.
They have stolen their homes. When someone will tell you, not only that they were stealing their homes, how they felt good, because you are human beings. So all these elements will make something will make from silence a way of expressing. This is why Adam, when he began to write the story of Waddah al-Yaman, who died in a silent way, who never said anything. And here he was trying to understand and to make a counter value. After the creation of the State of Israel, the Holocaust survivors were very much not respected in Israel, and they were given a terrible name, which was Sabunim. I don't know if you know this, but Sabunim comes from soap, taking into consideration this Nazi myth that the Nazis made from the bones of the Jews soap, which is not true. But But they were called sabunim, and they were not only not respected, they were refused because they went to their death without resisting.
Yeah.
And Adam was trying to say, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. Victims are victims. And you cannot give lessons to victims. And in this sense, he was defending actually his own experience. Because the people of Lidda also were taken to the butcher without saying anything. They first resisted, and then when Lidda fell, thousands of people were killed in the streets of Lidda. And then the bulk of the population was obliged to go in the wild, and many people died in the exodus from Lidda. And the story of Adam begins there. His mother, he was on the breast of his mother, and the mother died. And then Ma'mun came and picked him up. So in this sense, silence and speaking, what's the difference? We are trying to make silence speak. But we have to respect silence if we want silence to speak. It's enough. I think it's enough. It's long also. I will not be as long as that in my reply. So don't be afraid to ask me.
Well, maybe being afraid to ask questions could be more related to paying proper tribute to what is being talked about also. There's a question from Salim Nasser, he's a colleague, on the distinction between history and stories. Can we say that a tragedy that is not told has not existed, and that it only enters history if it has been told as stories?
Really, I don't know. I mean, the whole notion of history is very problematic, and the whole difference between history and story also is very problematic. Because I suppose that the story is the real history of the daily life, and this is what many historians now are aware of. And it began with the Annales school in France to write social, to write about the marginals and so on and so forth. But actually, what literature can depict and historians cannot is the daily life, is the daily language, is actually when I write a novel, the main thing I learn is not stories only. Okay, there are stories that I learned and many stories that I imagine. But what I really totally learned is the language. I learned how to speak and how to write. This language, which have no space in history, in the serious books of history. I mean, this is the essential part of the human experience. And this is what literature do. Now, this is what novel or stories or poetry, not only stories, I mean also poetry began, historically speaking, as stories, from Gilgamesh to the Greek epics and so on. These are stories also. These are not only poetry. So telling the story is a way of existing. The story is to exist. History, I can say history is to cover the existence with ideology, with presupposed ideas, with meaning, big meanings, which are of course meaningless, because the real meaning is the human life and the human experience.
Exactly.
I can read here in the chat that Selma has to leave in like 1 minute. So I don't want to, I'd like to ask Selma to say some final words if you would like before you go. And thank you already very much for taking part in this class, Selma.
No, thank you. And I'm very sorry. I slightly confused the time zones, and I thought that I had a little bit more time at the end. But it was fascinating to hear Elias speak. I'm really honoured and to listen to everyone here. Yes, I don't know if there's any particular questions for me. Or
well, thank you very, very much, Selma. It's it's been really a pleasure to have you here with us. So I just wanted to give you that space so that we understand and the students understand if at some moment you have to just go, don't worry.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you. And thank you to your students. And they can always contact me afterwards if they have any questions. And I hope to be able to share the bibliography. And I really congratulate you on running this series. So thank you, Aline.
Thank you, Selma. It was really great hearing you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, there's a question here, Elias, related to the relation to. Let me see if I understand. Okay, they're going to send me the question properly. I'd like to put in one comment here, if you could answer. In your novel, My Name is Adam, there's a moment in which in the dialogue with at the end of the book, Adam expresses the sentence, why didn't the Palestinians leave? Suddenly, as if he had this like insight and saying, okay, but why didn't the Palestinians leave? And this sentence resonates so strongly in that part of the book. Does this have anything to do? Is it in any way related to Ghassan Kanafani's question at the end of his book? Why didn't they shout?
No, I didn't think about this relationship actually, but maybe it have. But practically, it's about all the time the Israelis say that the Palestinians lost their land and lost their right to their land and lost their right to return because they left. And actually, in all wars, zones that are in war, people leave. In 2000, the war of July 2006, northern Israel was empty. The Israeli Jews left northern Israel because it was under the rockets of Hezbollah. But they didn't lose their properties. They went back. Now, most of the Palestinians, more than that, most of the Palestinians did not leave. They were kicked. They were obliged to leave. And we have testimonies as much as you want. They were obliged. And when we speak about the Palestinian exodus, we think that they left Palestine and came to Lebanon. This is not true. They left their village and went to another village, and then they left the other village to the other village till they found themselves on the Lebanese border or on the Syrian border or on the borders of the West Bank at that, which would become Jordan at that time. But my real question, after we collect the atrocities of the Nakba, and now we see the atrocities, Hawara is burned. Why the people of Hawara did not leave? I think this is what's amazing about the Palestinians, not why they left. We have to turn the question upside down. And actually what's amazing is that they did not leave. Yani, imagine that after all the atrocities of 1948, you had more than 150,000 Palestinians inside Israel. Now they are 2 million, right? And they are citizens, second class, third class, whatever citizens. But why they didn't leave? They lived under such conditions. When I speak about in the children of the ghetto, about the ghettoing of the cities, but actually the villages also were ghettos, because there was this military rule from 48 till late 66, till 67 actually. The Palestinians of Israel which is of Galilee and the Triangle and the Negev, couldn't leave their village without a permission from the military governor. If you are sick, you cannot go to a doctor. You cannot go to a hospital. You need a permission. So they were encircled in their villages. Their land was confiscated, and the only way to survive was to go and work to build the settlements of the colons, of the Jewish colons in their land. And really, why didn't leave? I think this is one. I think there is. I don't like to speak metaphysics, but there is something which is miraculous in the Palestinian experience. This people is still struggling, is still resisting after 75 years of occupation, after hundreds of massacres in the West Bank, in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. Something like 1 million people went to Israeli jails. 1 million from 3 million. They were 3 million at that time. Now they are 5, 6. 1 third of the population went to jail, went to prison, and they are still there. So I think the question is not like Kanafani. Kanafani, why they didn't knock? He wanted them to knock. Actually, I think they knocked, but Kanafani did not hear. Not Kanafani, I mean Abu Khayzara did not hear. And the problem is not the tongue, but the ear. Nobody heard them. But he wanted them to knock. Anna, I was asking why they didn't leave. I don't want them to leave, but I'm astonished. And I am in admiration of such a powerful relationship between a people and its lands. You know, there is one real national day in Palestine. This independence of Mahmoud Abbas and bullshit, this is meaningless. There is one real public event in Palestine, which we celebrate. It's called Yawm al-Ard, the Day of the Land, which is the day when we commemorate the relationship between the Palestinians and their land. This relationship with the land is the main issue of the Palestinian identity. خلاص بكفي معي.
خلاص.
Yes, Elias, we have 600 people enrolled in this class. We've had several hundred watching, and I think they're dumbfounded because we don't have any more questions, which we usually do. Safa, I'd like to give you some space for some final words if you would like to ask Elias, because also after this last explanation, the only thing left is to thank Elias very much.
Exactly, Arlene. I think there is nothing but silence now after what Elias have said. I only want to say that thank you so much for this, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to be with Elias in this class. So that's it. Thank you so much, and that's it.
Elias, and this class will be, will have the subtitles and eventually translation. So yeah, I'd like to finish thanking the students very much for enrolling, for taking part in this course with 13 classes. And I think we end on a note that invites more research, that invites more reading, that invites more talking. So thank you very much, Elias, for being with us. It has been really a great pleasure and an honor to have you and listen to your speech, to your words.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Tabla editor that made possible for us to show the classes and all the infrastructure has offered to how can we say, draw some have a random draw of 6 books, including some of Elias' books. Louise, maybe someone from Tabla could come in to say how this will be done. I have no idea how this draw will happen.
Where is, yeah.
Olá, tudo bem? Hello. We already we put the 334 numbers in a random website, and we did in a shuffle way, and the names will be sent to you, Erlyn, in WhatsApp for you
Okay.
to read. Okay?
Okay, fine. Okay, so just to announce rapidly, Jaqueline Cristina Casemiro has won the book by Elias Khoury, My Name is Adam. Julia Furlan, Mahmoud Darwish, Memories for Memória para o Esquecimento. They're all in Portuguese, by the way. Muhammad Taisir, the book Gaza, Land of Poetry, Gaza, Márcio Augusto has got this one. Ilan Pape's 10 Myths About Israel goes to Julia Rodrigues Lobo, and Ghassan Kanafani, Men Under the Sun, José Jorge Nader. So this will all be arranged, and I don't want to lose time with this right now. Elias, well, thank you very much for all this, and it has really been wonderful to listen to your speech. As I said, it's going to be registered and properly.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Safa. Thank you, Aline. Thank you all the students who bothered to hear me and to hear us. And let's hope we can shortly meet directly in São Paulo. This is what Tabla promised me, and I would like very much to come once again to São Paulo and to see this great country and this great city, and to see all the Syrian, Palestinian immigrants that are all over this country, and to enjoy the Brazilian literature, which I really admire very much. And we have read some of it translated by Safa, and some I read in English. And this is a great experience all the time of exchange and of knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elias. We hope we will see you soon here. Okay.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum. Shukran.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon.